This is where I go to visit Dr. Henri Parens to talk about who he is, what work he has done, and how his experience as a Holocaust survivor has led him to becoming a child psychiatrist and a tremendously influential person in his field. I had imagined what this experience would be like, but I did not anticipate the extent to which I would become so inspired and moved by his story. This is Dr. Henri Parens.
I was in the medical corps in the Army, and what I decided I would do is that I would go into psychiatry. From the very beginning, I wanted to go into mental health. As I began my work as a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, I wanted to do research. I was determined to do research. I wanted to do clinical work, teach, and do research. And I did research at the medical college. And in doing that research is when all of what was driving me really came out. I became a child psychiatrist because, having been traumatized myself with the Holocaust, I was treated very well at home. I've seen a lot of trauma in the people I've helped. And I think that trauma is a very big factor in creating a lot of problems in the world. That's what got me into the parenting education, when I understood that what parents do to their children can really make them become criminals. And losing my mother, as I did, at the age of 13, she was sent to Auschwitz. I knew that children, we know when a child breaks a leg that it hurts. But a lot of people don't realize that children can really suffer emotional pain, psychic pain. And that's one of the things I wanted to work with. I wanted to help children deal with their emotional problems and their traumas.
Since Dr. Parens' identity as a child psychiatrist is so closely linked to his experience in the Holocaust, in order to truly understand how his experience in the Holocaust has led him to the field of child psychiatry, I needed to hear his story.
I was born in Poland. My mother and my father divorced when I was about 3. My mother left Poland because in Eastern Europe the anti-Semitism was even worse than it was in Eastern Europe, where Germany is. And the pogroms were happening in Poland and in Russia. We had family in Brussels, and so that's where we went in Belgium. And we had a lovely family in Brussels. Of course, we were in touch with my father and my brother in Poland. And then in 1940, the war came. And given that we knew that we had to run away if the Germans would come to Belgium, we went to France. Within 5 weeks, France was defeated by Germany. Our armistice was signed, and the refugees, particularly the Jewish refugees, were then put into camps in France. We were in 2 camps in France, in southern France. Eventually, when I was 12, my mother told me that she wanted me to escape from the camp, which I did. We had a very good relationship. I trusted her. She trusted me. She felt I could do it. So I did. I did get away, went into a children's home then, that there were some children's home during the war in France. The next thing I know is that I'm on a list to come to America. And it was, of course, I had to come the parents weren't allowed to come with us. It was 50 kids came to America. We were the 3rd convoy of 50 kids to come, which was the last convoy. A number of years later, 5 years after I'd arrived here, is when I learned that my mother had not survived the war. It was yet another 15 years later that I discovered how it was that she didn't survive the war. And it is that from the camp where we were, she had been sent to Auschwitz. And which is why I hadn't heard from her during all that time. A colleague of mine, I had not talked about my experience to colleagues. I had talked about it at home, but not to colleagues. A colleague of mine asked me to talk about prejudice. I said, prejudice? Yeah, I should talk about prejudice. I kind of know something about it. And so in the late 1990s is when I first started to think about prejudice and talk about prejudice. I gave my first lecture in 1999. I don't mind telling you that while I was lecturing, I had to turn away and start to cry.
After hearing Dr. Parens talk about what had happened to him, I was struck by the level of hate he had experienced. So I asked him to speak further about the people responsible for the Holocaust, the people I had always classified as evil people. So some people describe Hitler, Eichmann, the Nazi Party as just like they're pure evil, they're the devil, and that's the explanation. They're just have evil in them, but that doesn't sound like...
That's not satisfactory. I mean, there is no such thing as evil people. There is no such thing as a human being who's a devil. His mother was a young woman. In fact, she was a late teenager when he was born, who worked for a Jewish family. And I don't remember what the story with the father. The father was an older man who wasn't in the picture at all, or what went on there. But during his childhood, Hitler had been maltreated in some ways. And then when he got rejected from the Vienna Art School, that really wounded him terribly. The next thing I know is that he's in the military.
It was so moving for me to hear Dr. Parens talk about Hitler in a way that brings him down to the level of a human being, rather than a monster who is innately evil. As Dr. Parens does this, he makes apparent how Hitler had complete ownership over his own hostility and prejudice. Dr. Parens also exposes how this extreme hostility can therefore be preventable, because hostility and prejudice are not innate traits. This reveals how war and genocide really is preventable. So, how has Dr. Parens' research in aggression and parenting informed his understanding of destruction and war? And how has his experience informed his research?
The theory that I came into my project with was that we're born with a death instinct, which can't be proven. And it's the primary psychoanalytic theory of aggression that Freud devised. As I was observing infants with their mothers from birth on, at about 15 weeks of age we began to see behavior that I was very surprised by. I did not expect. Which I mean is that children, young infants, were developing in what we would call an aggressive way, but it was what we then would have called neutralized aggression. In other words, it wasn't a destructiveness. It was just a push to get what they wanted and a real commitment to what they were trying to do, what we call neutralized aggression. Freud's theory of aggression would say, war is inevitable. We're born with a destructive drive. And I would say, no. I have a way of explaining aggression that does not account for destructiveness in that way. So I say, no, war is not inevitable.
In addition to his extensive research, Dr. Parens has also written his life's memoirs about his experience in the Holocaust. The way his memoirs have allowed him to deeply understand his own trauma and allowed him to understand why he chose to be a psychologist shows how much being a Holocaust survivor has impacted his life. His ability to write these memoirs also shows his resilience and bravery to share his story with the world.
I decided to start writing my memoirs on the 60th anniversary of the day that I know my mother was put on the train to go to Auschwitz. I had to write my memoirs. And that's when I learned why I did what I did.
Going into this experience, I expected to be inspired by Dr. Parens, but as I learned more about who his mother was and what she meant to him, I became increasingly inspired by her. Her love, courage, and belief in her son is the reason why Dr. Parens was able to successfully escape the concentration camp and come to America as a child. The strength and love Dr. Parens' mother had is clearly emulated in the man Dr. Parens is today.
My resilience comes from two principal sources. And I don't know which one to mention to you first. I can tell you that probably the most important one is that my mother loved me. That's the first source. The second source is the baggage that I came into the world with. You know, obviously good enough capacity to adapt. And if you are well cared for, and you have a good capacity to adapt, if a challenge is put in front of you, you'll go after it.
After experiencing such trauma and loss, Dr. Parens not only was able to survive, but he was able to lead a very successful life. He dedicated his life to helping children and conducting influential research, which not only demonstrates that war is preventable, but how to prevent it. So, what does this show about humanity? That a man could experience one of the most horrific things a person can experience, and not only develop a restored faith in humanity, but also dedicate his life to helping others. For me, this shows that the good of humanity is more powerful than the horror humans can be capable of. Dr. Parens, fueled by his mother's love, is an example of this.
I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm a lucky guy. Married my wife. We've been now married for 61 years. In fact, last week was our 61st anniversary. We have 3 wonderful sons, 8 grandchildren. And as they were growing up, I was kind of wondering, would they have been able to do what I did? It's interesting that it never occurred to me to ask that question with my own sons. But with my grandchildren, I had written about it, and I was then open enough to it. Could they have done it? And my answer is yes, they could have. Because in that day, if you were loved by your parents, and you were smart enough and capable enough, and your parents who loved you said, you've got to escape from here, they would do it.